This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed. The weekly wrap is the week in news and what's coming up. I'm Kate Watson.
And I'm Claire Kimball.
A flurry of activity around Taiwan has made news this week, as has a purchase by our Prime Minister.
Yes, that was certainly a thing. It's going to be a lot of Royals coverage coming up in the coming week, so we'll make sure you know how to get into all of that action. Also, the death of Liam Payne has been huge.
Yeah, big one. Less big story, but one that you put on Squiz's radar this week via your News Club newsletter was what's happening in Sudan. So we'll talk about that. And finally, we'll tell you about CHOGM.
It's the best acronym of all of the meetings.
I think it is too. If you have no idea what we're talking about, stay tuned. When it comes to skincare, you shouldn't have to choose between the stuff that works and what you can afford. That's why we've partnered with Go-To. There's no baffling science, no fluff with Australia's go-to for skincare. Just seriously effective products that make your skin and wallet happy. Level up your routine at gotoskincare.com. To start today, for no other reason than we can, we're asking you to please leave us a review if you like Weekly Wrap or any of our News Club podcasts. Reviews help other people give us a go, Claire.
I read reviews.
I read reviews too.
And
I don't mean our reviews. I do read our reviews.
Yeah, if you want to listen to another podcast, it's not the Squiz. I don't know why you would want to listen to another podcast. It's not the Squiz, but certainly I do. And I read those reviews. The positive ones mean that I'm absolutely more likely to listen to it.
Yeah.
Suffice to say, if you've got something that you want to tell us it's not so flattering, maybe just email us.
Just email us, hello@thesquiz.com.au. So, yeah, anything not so positive, say it privately. Anything positive, say it publicly. And I think that should be a good rule for life.
It really is a good way to approach life.
It is. Before we get into what happened around Taiwan this week, big breaking news towards the end of the week was confirmation from Israel that Yahya Sinwar has been killed. Yahya Sinwar was the leader of Hamas and the mastermind of the October 7 terror attacks. He's been touted as Israel's most wanted, and Israel's Prime Minister has said that the killing of the Hamas chief was the beginning of the end of the war in Gaza. Claire, we're not going to get into that story today because there are lots of bits and pieces still happening, but it's big, and we wanted to put it on your radar. To another area experiencing much tension, this week China surrounded the island of Taiwan as part of what they called military drills.
Yeah, so that followed a speech from last week. Taiwan's President William Lai, he vowed to resist annexation. He also said that he would resist encroachment upon our sovereignty.
So he gave that speech on Taiwan's National Day. These drills really hit international headlines on Monday. It was quite a blast that saw the issue of China's ambitions back front and centre. That's, as I say, it sort of came and went, but this is one that we've been talking about for so long.
For years
haven't
now.
Talked about recently.
Yeah.
As I said, it didn't go on for long, happened quickly. Maps published by Chinese state media indicated that its forces were positioned around the whole island for a minute, and then there was a note saying that the drills had been successfully concluded the next.
And I only really clocked, actually going back and looking at the coverage, that when you look at what the Chinese had to say about it, their Coast Guard actually released an image on Weibo, which is a Chinese social media platform. The patrol had actually formed the shape of a heart around Taiwan.
And so that was deliberate.
Seems to be. Maybe that was just the picture they generated, but it was pretty cheeky.
And this is the thing, like you read the reports about that and you can see the image, and we'll put a link to the image in your show notes, but it was supposed to, according to Chinese propaganda, be a positive sign of love, like we love Taiwan. It feels a bit like what I think gaslighting is, though.
There's not a lot of love for the current Taiwan regime, that's for sure. They really don't like that Taiwan is independent, that it has a democratic system of government. They want to reunite it with the Chinese mainland. So it's pretty full on. What Taiwan said about what happened in those drills is that there were 34 naval vessels and 125 5 aircraft. They formed that formation around the island. The Chinese military, which is known as the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, they said that the drills involved all wings of the army, that it was designed to simulate an attack on Taiwan by land, sea and air.
Chinese military drills close to Taiwan, as I said, aren't new. Its fighter jets have been regularly entering Taiwanese airspace, but these drills seem to be getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, and I guess without understanding all of that background, if this just came out of the blue, China encircling a nation with its ships and with its aircraft, you would go, wow, and it would dominate the news all week. But of course, with the context, we know that this is just sort of a ratcheting up of these tensions, and it feels like another step up that ladder.
Yeah, and then what comes next, of course, is the commentary, the experts talking about what it means. It shows that China's tightening its military squeeze on Taiwan and that that's sort of the new normal. The idea is that if there's daily pressure that exhausts the island's defence forces, it could increase the incentive for Taiwan to just roll over, accept their fate and be reunited with mainland China.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, locally here in Australia, we're very, very interested about all of this because if Taiwan was to just roll over, it would mean that there's potentially big consequences for our national security. Of course, if China gets more power in the region, if China has more access, particularly to territory in our region, then it's absolutely a thing for our trade routes.
About a third. So we looked this up just to give you some stats. We talked about the South China Sea so much.
A lot.
Maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Exactly.
Just to the numbers, about a third of global trade transits between the South China Sea. It doesn't just sit there, goes through.
Yeah.
We're big users of the major ports in China and Singapore and Malaysia as key entry and exit points for goods that we're importing, goods that we're exporting. That means we need open access to the South China Sea, and that's why our military participates in freedom of navigation exercises there.
There's big concerns that China will actually try and lock down those trade routes and by getting control of Taiwan and also territory in that South China Sea, that there'll be issues for freight going through. So you can understand why our military wants to participate in what they call freedom of navigation exercises. Those exercises happen quite regularly. The United States takes a big role, also Malaysia, the Philippines, Japan, plenty of countries get involved in those. This story also touches on the US election, like pretty much everything does these days. Of course, the United States is Taiwan's biggest supporter.
Yeah, we said on our shortcut series on the US election, I think it was in the first episode that we did a couple of weeks ago, that there are a few places where US leadership doesn't matter. It absolutely matters on this one. So what did the US have to say?
So Anthony Blinken is the Secretary of State. He's the guy who takes the lead in most of these sorts of discussions. What he said is that we've been saying for a very long time that we're very concerned about what China does in the region. They're very worried that China will actually try and take Taiwan by force.
Other news stories this week, Claire. Our Prime Minister and his partner, Jodie Hayden, have purchased a home on the New South Wales Central Coast.
Have you spent much time around Copacabana?
None.
None at all?
No.
I have a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. It's beautiful around there.
There you go. Well,
Very
you can
nice.
see why they might like to buy a home there.
It's only about an hour from Sydney, so a quick trip down the highway. The cliff-top home that they've purchased, a beautiful spot, $4.3 million. Reports this week said that it's a joint purchase, that both of them are in for that bit of real estate. It's an area where Hayden is from and where her extended family continues to live.
Yeah. Cue, though, the fact that he's Prime Minister, the fact that we're in a housing crisis. What does it say about his planning as well? Like, a lot of people retire to the Central Coast from Sydney. So you can imagine, I mean, no one had to imagine, anyone saw it this week. There was just so much commentary about that decision and what that decision meant. We had a bit of feedback from our readers and listeners on this story. Very divided opinions. Some saying, well, who cares? Like, let him buy a house if he wants to buy a house. Good on him. Happy days. Fine. Others saying it was tone deaf.
Yeah. On the pro side for Anthony Albanese, heaps of politicians also buy properties and don't get this kind of scrutiny when it comes to their homes or the multiple homes that they have. Others saying, yeah, really tin-eared as we're heading into an election that heaps and heaps of Aussies are struggling with their mortgage repayments and even paying the rent.
I guess we also know that he did consult about it. He was concerned about it. He sort of didn't go into it blindly knowing it wouldn't be an issue. He was aware it was an issue and he still did it. Who knows whether it will impact his chances at an election, but that certainly was the talk of the town this week.
It really was. And look, I reckon it would cause many to pause for thought about why on earth would you go into politics?
I thought you were considering maybe a tilt.
I reckon being the Prime Minister would be really awesome.
I do not.
You do not? I'm not that much interested either, to be honest. Why? Why would you do it?
Why would you do it? And evidenced by the week that he has had. To another news story, it was early Thursday morning we learnt that Liam Payne had died. He was found dead, Claire, after falling 3 floors from a hotel in Buenos Aires. For a big part of the public, he's absolutely a household name, devastated about his death. For others, it's okay if you need some context, I think, when it comes to Liam Payne.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably a generational thing as much as anything else. So he was one of the 5 members of One Direction. One Direction was huge.
Huge.
Absolutely massive. It was a phenomenon. And those boys, as they were in those days, they were lumped together. They came together on one of those boy band reality shows. It was The X Factor in the UK.
It was singing shows.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for 6 years, from 2010 to 2016, they had hit after hit after hit.
So many great songs. They were managed by Simon Cowell. They started with the song That's What Makes You Beautiful. People might recognise that. And
That'll
I know
be
many
stuck
people.
in my head now.
Exactly. As you say, hit after hit after hit. Other band members included Harry Styles, Niall Horan, Zayn Malik and Louis Tomlinson. Claire, this is made all the more devastating by the fact that Liam Payne had a child.
Yeah, a 7-year-old named Bear. That's with Cheryl Cole. Cheryl was another big household name when it came to British pop. So that boy was born in 2017. They broke up in 2018, and more recently there's been a lot of talk about Payne and his relationships, speculation that he wasn't doing very well.
Yeah, how he treated former partners. It's not a nice story, but lots of tributes for him. However, a complicated legacy. Another big news story that hasn't actually been in the headlines, we do this occasionally where we pull out a story that hasn't necessarily been one of the biggest this week, but it certainly is a big news story when it comes to something that's bubbling along, and that's the civil war and famine in Sudan. It was the subject, as I said at the top, of your News Club newsletter on Monday. We got a lot of really positive feedback about you putting that on people's radar.
Yeah, and even from some people who I know are very intense news consumers, that they've been so tied up in their head with what's happening in the Middle East.
Me.
Yeah, exactly. What's happening in Ukraine, if you want to look at other conflicts, US elections, for example. So, look, if it's news for you that we even have a newsletter.
Oh, yeah, you better mention what on earth we're talking about. Yeah.
It comes out on mid-Monday. We deliver you what we call club picks. So these are 3 or 4 recommendations of things to watch or to read or to listen to. And it's a bit of a deep dive on one particular topic that we think just warrants a bit more attention.
Yeah, they're not random topics. They're very aligned with the news, of course, with the headlines. This week, I guess it was a little bit different with your selection of what's happening in Sudan, but because we got that great feedback of people saying, gee, I had no idea, we thought we'd cover it in Weekly Wrap as well. So what's going on is that General Burhan is the current leader of Sudan. He took power after a military coup in April 2019. That followed months of protests against Omar al-Bashir's government. They'd been in power for 30 years.
Do you remember doing that on the Squiz Today?
When we were hosting Squiz Today, this was a big deal.
That coup. Yeah, exactly right. Because he had been in power for such a long time. He was a really bad guy. He was wanted by the International Criminal Court on charges of crimes against humanity, war crimes, etc. So, yeah, it was quite a big thing that his government was overthrown.
When he was overthrown, there was hope that the country would transition to a civilian government with free elections. Long story short, that hasn't happened. 2 military men, General Burhan, who I said before, who's the head of the armed forces, and General Hemeti, who lead a paramilitary force called the Rapid Support Forces, the RFS, they're fighting it out.
Yeah, 2 generals who were very much part of that former government are now in a civil war. So that civil war started in April last year. Since then, 150,000 people have died. 10 million people have been displaced, mostly over the borders into other neighbouring countries.
It's big, big numbers. There are different figures that are reported, but those numbers are figures from US officials. On top of that, you stack on a famine, as I mentioned. The UN says more than 2 million Sudanese are at risk of death by starvation by the end of November.
Yeah, we're talking about in 6 weeks' time. So when you look at the end of summer, so heading into January, they say maybe 2.5 million people there might starve to death. So they say it's the worst famine that the world has seen in 40 years. I certainly have these memories from childhood of all of that big world effort to try and help what was happening in Ethiopia. For example, World Aid, remember Bob Geldof and big concerts and all of that. We're talking something at the scale of that. It's mostly man-made to this whole crisis, the famine. The war has disrupted the harvest seasons, and the sides are actually blocking food aid as part of the war to try and get the population to actually fight for them or reject the other side. So big questions then about what can be done.
Yeah, and to that point, there's a reason the UN says it's one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters. Because it's very difficult to sort out because, as you say, it is man-made. There's religious and ethnic overlays to it as well. The question is, who has the power to broker peace? Are we talking about the US again?
Definitely pointing fingers back at the United States. So the United Nations is also very deeply involved, but things are moving very, very slowly. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, remember we spoke about him a lot during COVID, during the pandemic. Yeah. He's the Director General of the United Nations World Health Organization. Just recently, he's one that's expressed his utter frustration that this whole crisis is just falling on deaf ears.
He says the humanitarian sector, so aid agencies, need a lot more support. They're the ones delivering most of the help that's actually getting through. He says they need way more. They need $1 billion in urgent support.
Like just now. They just need that right now, let alone to get through what will be a very, very difficult period of time with the war and with the famine. It's not just a disaster that affects Sudan either. So if you've heard in the news maybe some bubbling of stories about a crisis in the Horn of Africa, this is all related because, as we talked about, a lot of those people are spilling out into the region, and there's other nations that have big problems as well that are trying to house those refugees and keep them fed and keep them moving along as well.
If you're after skincare that works but without the sticker shock, we're right there with you. That's why we're stoked to have Go2 Skincare as a podcast partner on News Club. With Go2, you get all the good stuff. We're talking potent, effective ingredients without the hefty price tag. No compromises, just happy skin. Level up your routine at go2skincare.com. What's coming up is the section of the podcast where we try and get you ahead of the news. I love this part of the podcast. I mean, it gets me ahead of the news, if no one else.
You and I are practical people who like things that help us.
Yeah.
And this is something that helps.
It's so good. And I love that feeling of having flagged something and then seeing it being in the news and going, oh, good. Like, I knew that was coming up.
I'm on top of it.
I'm all over it.
My life is in order.
I get really annoyed when we miss stuff. But we can't catch everything.
Really? I've never noticed that before.
We can't catch everything. But look, this week...
If I have to hear about missing Beef Week once more...
No, it was the Aurora Australis last week. I think that I was annoyed that we missed. But, you can't catch every full moon.
You can't.
No,
exactly.
You can't. But,
an agricultural event. No.
No, but Beef Week was great.
I know.
Anyway.
We move on.
It's going to be Royals, more Royals for the next week. So we will talk about that. But first of all, just to put on your radar, it's the Everest Racing Carnival, a bit of racing coming up. We're sort of in racing season now. That's in Sydney. The Caulfield Cup is on in Melbourne. It's also the ACT election today, and also 3 by-elections in Sydney.
Yep, get out and vote, as they say in the United States, and here in Australia you have to get out and vote, otherwise you will get a fine. Monday, it's the start of Media Literacy Week. It's a big week for us.
Big deal for us. We're big into helping Australians be more media literate. I guess that's one of the things that we like to think that we do.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about our media literacy program for the teachers of primary age kids to do in the classroom. It's called News Hounds. Thousands are signing up and doing it, and they'll be pleased to know next week we're launching the 2.0 version.
This is so exciting for us. The Squiz Kids team, the News Hounds team took us through as a team this week what that actually looks like. It's pretty schmick.
It's great. I mean, the thing that I would say to anyone listening who's a teacher or has a teacher in their life is that this is designed by teachers and by journalists. So we have a teacher on staff called Christy Kitcherina. She's amazing. And then journalists Bryce Corbett and Amanda Bauer, they've come together to design this program, which is so user-friendly for the teacher now, and also has this amazing, obviously, expertise of experienced journalists on top of that. We're really proud of it.
We are. And how lucky have we been? I mean, Christy and Amanda, Christy is a teacher, as you said, Amanda is a teacher/journalist.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even,
Like, just incredible that we've sort of found the needle in the haystack to actually do this really impressive work. We're really, really proud of it. When you look at mis and disinformation, fake news, all of these things that even us as adults struggle with, to be able to put tools in the hands of our children and make sure that they're able to be informed, media literate adults is really, really something.
Yeah, we're really proud of it, and we'll be talking about it quite a lot across all of our Squiz products next week, so expect to hear a bit more about it. Royals.
Yeah.
King Charles and Queen Camilla touched down last night. They don't have any official plans until Monday. We promised last week we'd find out what the opportunities are for the members of the public to see them. We now know, Claire.
Yeah, there might be some other sort of opportunities around this, but who knows? They're keeping some very, very secret plans very close to their chest. But what we do know, Monday in Canberra, 12:35 p.m, meet their majesties as they make their way to the War Memorial. There's a For Our Country memorial there. So that's where they're going to be. At 1 o'clock, the official phrase is catch a glimpse of their majesties. Formalities are going to be at the front of Parliament House. Big ceremonial welcome there, followed by an opportunity to meet the King and the Queen on the Parliament House forecourt. If you know the pictures with the little pond in the middle and the big gravel as you come up to the front doors, that's at 2:10. That's where they'll be.
There's very specific language in their public releases, which is you can catch a glimpse at this time, and you can officially meet them at this time. And they actually say the words catch a glimpse. So on Tuesday, they'll be in Sydney at the Opera House at 4:20 p.m. At 4:50, you can catch a glimpse. They'll be at the Man of War steps as they're going to get on a boat, the Admiral Hudson vessel, and then there's a fly past by the Royal Australian Navy, the Air Force and the Army. That's it.
That's it.
That's your only chance.
Okay. Unless you want to go to Samoa for Choggum.
Unless you want to go to Samoa for Choggum, because on Wednesday they head to Samoa for Choggum. Choggum, drum roll, is the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. It's a big one, 56 Commonwealth countries. So we're talking about the likes of course, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, India, South Africa, heaps more. They meet, they chat, there's a retreat.
A retreat. And there's some fancy things to wear.
So I hear. We were trying to work out if this is where they wear the fancy shirts or if that was at APEC, which they do at APEC.
Definitely do at APEC, but I think you're right. I think there is some kind of uniform or special jacket or shirt or something. Yeah. And I would have thought Samoa would have to see something nice.
And I wonder if King Charles will don their local outfit. Sure he will.
He's hot in a safari suit, so maybe they'll get him one of those.
I was reading the Samoan news or whatever it was, and they said it's too hot to wear a suit. Don't wear a suit. So there you go. Permission to dress down. Squiz recommends, I watched The Iron Claw. That's a movie with Zac Efron.
Yeah.
I think it was released last year. It's on Amazon Prime. It's my favourite kind of thing to watch, I guess, because it's a true story, based on a true story. It's really sad, but it's really a very amazing story about a family of professional wrestlers.
You said you really enjoyed Zac Efron?
He's great.
Yeah.
He's really good.
It has started popping up in my little algorithm too.
Because I spoke to you about it.
Yeah, must be. It's recording me somewhere. I'll definitely put that on my list, so thank you for that. For me, another sort of a bit older actually than your recommendation, Kunk on Earth. I reckon we probably talked about this when it first came out a couple of years ago.
I didn't think it was funny.
It doesn't surprise me that you didn't think that it was funny. However, I galloped through it. It's a mockumentary.
That's right.
It's on Netflix. It is about basically the history of everything, and Philomena Kunk is your host for that. I think it's hilarious. I, as I said, galloped through it the first time it came out. I just revisited it the other day, and it's so good.
She's trying to convince me it's funny, and I'm like, it's not my sense of humour.
No, it's even just for the history bits. Like, there's enough in it to actually go, oh yeah, how did religion start?
Oh, and so even though it's a mockumentary, you can still learn actual
It's still
facts.
based in truth, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, all right. I don't know. If you enjoy Claire's sense of humour, which I know most of you do, you might like that.
It's got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, that's all I'm saying.
I know, you can't dispute it. Quick squiz press, Claire, of course, is just to mention that we've still got those interviews rolling out over the coming weeks. Next one, no surprise, is all about media literacy. It's with Tanya Notley. She's like the researcher into Australia and media literacy, so I chat with her about that. Some big questions for her.
Yeah.
I thought, like, how threatening is this to our democracy, and how concerned are you about our ability to discern misinformation and disinformation, and what are the risks?
It's impossible to have a small conversation about this.
Yeah.
These are really big themes.
And one of the big themes that's present in the news and is going to be more present across this election cycle, I think, is the government's mis and disinformation bill, which is there's already a draft tabled, but it's due to go through Parliament this year.
It's been introduced. It hasn't.
Oh, sorry, it has.
Yeah,
It has been introduced. There are a lot of people that are very concerned about free speech.
Yes.
And that question of free speech. So that will be the conversation. So we talked to her about that.
Yeah, and who is the arbiter of what is mis and disinformation? Is it a government agency or is it something else? It's a whole big question about exactly how we say what we say and who's accountable for it.
Like really, really difficult questions to answer. But we get into all of that in that interview. That'll be out on Wednesday morning. Thanks for listening to this episode of Weekly Wrap. We'll catch you next week.